Hello everyone, this is Mary McKee coming to you live with Findmypast. We're just going to wait for a couple seconds here, let people join, let people get comfortable. Hope you're all relaxed. I've been enjoying a bit of the sunshine during this lockdown period. It's been nice to get outside and enjoy a bit of the barbecue and the sunshine at the moment. And today I'm going to be talking to you about tracing your female ancestors with a few of my tips that I've learned over the years with working with Findmypast. Some of the places that you can look for female ancestors and just overall discussion of different record sets and female history as well. We've got a few more people here joining us. Hello, Rosie has just joined us, and we have Ellie from Findmypast is on the line. Ellie will be helping with any questions or comments. During the presentation, hopefully I can answer some of your comments live, but if not, I will be around for about 10 or 15 minutes afterwards to answer some of your questions. We have William and Sujo has joined us as well. Hi, everyone. And Karen from Enfield. Hello there. It seems to be very sunny. Excellent. Excellent. And we've got a few more, so just a couple more seconds, bear with us, and then we will jump into the presentation. Okay, and a few more. We've got a couple of our top fans joining us today. Hi, Sue Kelly. Thanks for joining. And I think, yeah, it looks like we are ready to go. Okay, so jumping into the presentation. Deborah, I liked your comment there. Your grandmother's name is Mary McKee. Well, that's very interesting. Okay, so tracing your female ancestors, top 3 tips. So my top 3 tips are I'm gonna go through my top 3 tips in this presentation today. And just to tell you a little bit more, my name is Mary McKee and I'm coming to you from my home in Northern Ireland. You will notice that my accent is a little strange. It is a blend of Philadelphia, where I grew up, and a bit of Northern Irish, where I've been living for the last 11 years. So today we're talking about our female ancestors, and they are an indispensable part of our family tree. Without them, our trees wouldn't have been able to grow. Just showing you a couple pictures of my own ancestors. On the left-hand side is my grandparents' wedding photograph. And on the right-hand side is my great-great-grandmother, Clara Schöpflin, who came over to Philadelphia from Germany. And so these are 2 key women in my family tree. And without being able to find out more about them, I wouldn't have been able to open up more branches with my family tree and understand more about where I come from. Because I'm coming to you remotely, this isn't a live, I can't do a live video, so you can't see me. So there's a little picture of myself, so you can actually see the person, see what I look like, who you're talking to. And I am the head of content operations with Findmypast. So it means basically all of the new records and the newspapers that you find on Findmypast, I help get those onto the site. I work alongside our licensing department who go out and discover fantastic new records for you. And then I work with our teams that get those published. I will tell you, after a full month in lockdown, my hair roots and my eyebrows don't look exactly the same as that picture. That's a little old. So to begin, my top 3 tips. So number 1, find your ancestor's birth name. And by birth name, I mean the name given to your ancestor at the time of her birth. generally called her maiden name. In most cases, it'll be her father, it'll be, a first name and her father's surname, which will usually be the family name, but that doesn't always happen. That's not always true, but it's always key, especially if she has changed her name in her life, to find that pivotal surname, so that way you can open up her branch of your family tree. Number 2 is women are everywhere. Don't limit your search to just records where you think a woman would show up. You'll be surprised at the type of records that you'll find women in, like apprenticeships, electoral registers before 1918, some trade union records, and military records, and we'll take a look at some of those today. And of course, newspapers, and more newspapers. I can see in the comments there that Ellie has mentioned that I'm very pro newspapers, and that is absolutely true. I love searching through them. I end up going down rabbit holes all the time and getting lost in my research in the newspapers, but I can't stress them enough, and we'll take a look at some of the ways that your ancestor might appear in those. So let's begin with tip number 1, find your ancestor's birth name. And where can you find that? Where are you going to discover that? So straightforward, of course, is her birth record. So for that, I'm just going to skip over that. That's pretty obvious. If you're able to track that far, find her birth record, you would already know her birth name at that point to know what to search for. But there's also the marriage records. Marriage records before your ancestor is getting married would often have her original surname. Then there is burial records, census records, wills, and pensions, or just some of those other records that I'm going to take a look at and show you where to look for in these to see to discover that surname. So if we begin with the marriage records, one of the records I'm showing you here is a banns record. And this comes from our Norfolk Banns and Marriages collection. And banns are records that you'll find frequently in Church of England records, Anglican records, particularly from UK parishes. They announced that 2 people were intending to get married. So it's the same as today, that whenever someone's going to get married and they go to the registrar, you still have to make that announcement before you get married to say that you intend to get married. Banns were announced on the 3 Sundays in the 3 months leading up to the wedding. So in this record, you'll find the name of the intended groom and the intended bride. So we can see the bride's name is Sarah Cause. So in this circumstance, you could be searching for the groom's name, and by searching for his name, come up with Sarah's maiden name there. Another great thing about banns records, it does include a parish, and in this circumstance, it does also include that they are both servants to the same person. So I would assume that they met during their employment as servants in the same house. Okay, taking a look at another type of record related to marriages is the actual marriage register. The marriage registers, this particular one is from Yorkshire, and again, it's one of these Anglican Church of England register books. These are fantastic records if you have English or UK ancestors, because the parish registers were kept as early as 1538. You can go back generations and generations within these records. In this instance here, you can see Henry Hill and Mary Elizabeth Jones. So again, Jones, you have found her maiden name. And it also includes their condition, which means their marital status. So we have bachelor and spinster. This is important to always check that, because sometimes it will say you'll have a widow, and you might have to do even more investigation, because sometimes widows would use their name from their first marriage or previous marriage instead of always going back to their maiden name. Okay, so moving on from marriages, I'm going to take a look here at the wills. This is a very early wills record. It's from 1576. It's in our London Court of Houston will abstracts. And a will abstract is basically a summary. So it's a short description of what you'll find in the full will document. In this case, these wills are held at the London Metropolitan Archives, but we have all the abstracts available online. And when you're considering what records to look at as well, you do want to think about what was it like for women at the time, what were the laws. You'll be surprised how things have changed actually far earlier than you would think. Wills, women start writing more wills around the 1870s, and especially after the 1882 Married Women's Property Act, you start to see more wills being written by women, because after 1882, married women still held their own property and still had ownership over their own material. So they would write wills. In this particular circumstance is Edward Johns. And if you read through his will, you can see that his mother's name is Margaret, so that's great. There's another name for your family tree. And his sister's name is Margaret as well, another name. But he also leaves some money to Elizabeth Bass, who is his mother-in-law. And that's excellent because now you know his mother-in-law's name, which you can infer that that would be his wife's original name or maiden name was Bass as well. So you can add that to your family tree as more evidence to strengthen your case about what her family name was, what Edward's wife's family name was. And these will records are fascinating because you will find multiple people in it. So you have so many names, and you can find nieces and nephews as well in these collections. Okay, so I'm just going to move over to some burial records. And in this case, these records are from the London Bunhill Fields Cemetery. These are nonconformist burials. So nonconformists are non-Anglican church or religious individuals. And within these records, oftentimes when you find about monumental inscriptions, so those are monumental inscriptions are the monumental inscriptions are like the tombstones or the gravestones. And on those, as we all know, multiple people could be buried in the same location. So you'll find more information about not just the one person you're looking for, but also who else they're buried with. And this is an example where you have Joseph Adams and Anne Adams buried together. It gives a description a bit more about them and their dates, their life dates. But then there's also a bit on there that says also the body of Mrs. Jenny Grove, wife of Sylvanus Grove, a merchant and daughter of Joseph and Anne. So by possibly searching for Jenny's husband and coming across like where he was buried, I actually found out that he was buried with his in-laws. And by finding his in-laws, you've actually found his wife's family tree, you've found his wife's parents' names. So again, another interesting way to try and find your female ancestors. We have a lot of comments coming in here. Somebody has mentioned, Amanda has mentioned that there's many Huguenots buried in Bunhill Fields. That's absolutely true. And we have some questions coming through as well. So when I have time after the presentation, I'll try and get through some of these more detailed questions. This is an example of a death record, a certificate of death. And within it, this is quite a detailed one. It's a more of a modern record than the ones that we've looked at before. And this one's from 1958. This is actually from Pennsylvania, and it is a death record for my great-grandfather. And the woman that I mentioned earlier, Clara Chaplin, and you saw her photograph at the beginning of my presentation. Well, you can see here in this example that it gives, for the certificate of death, it actually asks for the mother's maiden name. So this is a really great example where you get one of these detailed records in front of you. Make sure that you really take your time and go through every single part of it, especially with these and like those monumental inscriptions as well. Take your time and go through every detail. Write down everything, write down every name that appears, because for some reason they're connected in your ancestors' life. Within burial records and death records as well, particularly death notices or death announcements, you'll find more information about their family. And on certificates, you'll often find an informant too, who informed the registrar of their death. And that can sometimes be a spouse, be a child, or some kind of a relation. So keep an eye out for those ones too. I think census records are really interesting when you can follow those every 10 years and see how a family dynamic has changed and who's living with whom and where. And in this example, you can see Richard is the head of the house and he's living with his wife, his daughter, and his 2 sons, but he's also living with his mother-in-law. So it's possible, you know, maybe 10 years earlier she wasn't living there, but when you check the next record in 1891, you see that she has started to live there. And that's a great way to find Laura's maiden name was probably Peel. You can see that all the descriptions are there to explain that that is a mother-in-law. So again, this is another situation where you want to take your time and read every name on the census too. Make sure you're capturing everything. Pension records can reveal a lot about a particular person's family. Sometimes, for example, I was looking through the Royal Irish Constabulary pension records before, and I could find details instead of a person's pension going to his wife, and it was actually going to his sister who was in care of his son. So that was a circumstance where I was able to add another name onto a family tree, his sister's name, to know that she was caring for his son after his death. And in this pension record, this comes from the British Army Officers' Widows Pension Forms. The records cover the years from about 1755 to 1908, and they pertain to applications for a pension or for child compensation if an officer has died on service or half pay. And the collection includes forms and evidence of vital events, specifically of a marriage. In order to apply for the pension, you did have to provide evidence of a marriage and, of course, evidence of death as well. So as you can see here, it's quite hard to read because there's so many notes and scribbles on the document, but Mrs. Margaret Wood, it says, Mrs. Margaret Wood came this day before me and made an oath that she was lawfully married at Doncaster on the 15th day of October, 1787 to James Wood. So Margaret did have to go forward and make an oath about her marriage. There's also another annotation on the right-hand side. It's written different than the rest of the information going in the middle. And it does say that there's an annex, and it does include a certified copy of the parochial register. So that's that parish registers like we were looking at before. So this pension form, it's not just one form, there's multiple documents within this folder that you can browse through to see. And you can see now a copy of the original parish register. And again, it reiterates the same information to say that they were lawfully married, they were married by license, and then it does include Margaret Cave's maiden name. So this could be a circumstance where you're just hitting a brick wall and you can't find that original marriage record. You don't know much more about James's wedding, but by finding his pension information, you're able to discover that his wife's maiden name was Margaret Cave at the time that they married in 1787. So Cindy has asked in the comments, what suggestions do you have for finding maiden names before 1820 in Ireland, or Erin at the time? Well, actually not at the time, sorry. But I would follow some of these similar recommendations for Ireland as well. Take a look not just at your straightforward life events, your birth, marriages, and deaths, but look at these other types of records. I mentioned RIC pension records, those come from Ireland. You can also search, there are Irish wills as well. So those are other records you can look at. I will come across another Irish record as we go on in this. So moving on from that critical birth name or maiden name, my second tip is that women are everywhere. Please don't think that you can only look at specific types of records, because that's the only place you'll find your ancestor. It is remarkable where else you'll find them. And I just mentioned there with Cindy's question that I was going to follow up with another Irish record. And there is on the left-hand side here, these are, this record comes from the Ireland Merchant Navy crew lists. And in this document, you'll have every ship had to create a full list of their entire crew. They're quite detailed with the age and where they're from. And the crew didn't always just include men. It wasn't just the ones working, like, you know, the sailors, but it was also included like the waiters and waitresses and anybody dealing with the food. So in this example here, number 31, it's kind of hard to read the handwriting, is Elizabeth Cameron. She's 24. And Elizabeth is on board the City of Amsterdam, which is a ship registered in Dublin. And she first signed this agreement on the 10th of April in 1900 in Newcastle. So that's where she got on board the ship. The records also show where somebody may have served previously, and her previous ship was the Princess of Wales that she served on the year before. On the right-hand side, I've mentioned here some freemen and apprentice records too. So the first example here is from the city of York. These are records related to apprentices and freemen from as early as 1272 all the way to 1930. And Maria is named as a freeman of the city by birthright. So her father, John, was already a freeman of the city. So by birth, even though she was his daughter, she still was able to inherit the title as freeman. And then in the second example, which is from the city of London, and it is for the haberdashers, the apprentices and freemen. And we have Mary Wimbich in 1660 was made a freeman of the city, and because she is the daughter of Alexander Wimbich. And it says by Patr, which is shortened for like patrimony, meaning like by birthright again. And then I want to talk about some electoral registers. So electoral registers, even though we all know about the history of the suffragettes and the suffrage movement and the right for women to get the right to vote, which happened in 1918. But keep in mind, that was actually the right to vote, in England, in Great Britain, was 1918. And that was the right to vote in the parliamentary elections. So before that time, they would have voted in local county collections or for local boards as well and councils. And not always, but it happened in the 1800s that they were able to start in those elections. So don't ignore the electoral registers. Always just double check those as well. And this example here is from Frankfurt Ward in Plymouth. And you can see here, I've kind of expanded the one section. You can see lots of women's names. And this is a list. These are Burgess rules. So a citizen is a citizen of the town. So they would be allowed to vote in the local election. So it gives the woman's name and her dwelling, her location as well. And I have to say, when I was putting these slides together in the past, I thought it was really interesting that there were so many women here. So just out of curiosity, I did decide to take a look a bit more about Cambridge Street. And I found it in the 1891 census, and you get and find all of these women living there. And it's a great way to just double check, the information that you're looking at. And on these census records, the women are listed as the head. For many of them, they're listed as the head of the household. So just remember, when you're looking at census records, women will often be the head of the household as well as men. In a couple circumstances here, they are widows. Mary is a dressmaker and Henrietta is a brewer. You also have Charlotte, who was listed on the electoral register. She's a charwoman. And in the last section there, you can see Sophia is a mother-in-law to the head of the husband. So again, that's another example of where you can find that census record and find out more about that family and about the the husband of the house and his wife, because his mother is living with them. We have a question came through here from Jeffrey, and he asks, if you have a marriage record with no ages listed, how are you able to research further back? And Jeffrey, one tip for that would be consider, I don't have the year of the marriage record in front of me here, but consider what the age was for a marriage at that time. Was it 16, 18? Was it 21? Most likely. So I would usually gauge it from about 21 and then start to count back from there. And to give a rough idea about when a birth date would be, that usually helps. Particularly with earlier records anyway, you do, when you are doing your research, you do want to kind of plus or minus a year. So say you have, even in the census records right now, it does say that Clara Richards is 36, but there's some times where that was written down incorrectly, and you also want to factor that in, that maybe they had actually just turned 26, so your calculations might be a little bit off by a year or so. And when you get to the earlier records, sometimes they didn't in fact all up to date with their birth year. People weren't really fussed all the times with a yearly birthday party like we do now. Kim has also mentioned in the comments here that sometimes people were illiterate and maybe couldn't write, maybe wrote things down incorrectly when they're recording things. Always remember with these records, no, they weren't creating these records for you to find your ancestor. They were creating some of these records quick, and it was written by a clerk. So that's how you get some mistakes. And I also want to have a quick mention with military records. Women joined the military service in the First World War. We have service records online from 1917 with the Army Auxiliary Corps and the Royal Navy Service, which were nicknamed the Wrens. And also from 1918, women joined the Air Force. And we also have Royal Navy Service. It's listed twice, but because there's office records and there's rating records, which are slightly different ranks. So double check military service. You never know. Maybe your ancestor served and you didn't really know about it. Maybe it wasn't, something they talked about with the rest of the family. Outside of that, you also want to check some of those other records from like the Red Cross, some nursing records as well. Those might be able to provide you with more information about your ancestor's life. Okay, so I'm just moving on to my final tip here. So we've got newspapers, and more newspapers. I'm obsessed with them, always check them and keep searching through because we add new newspapers every single week. So you might go week 1 and not find something, but by week 3 we have added another 200,000 pages, so you might find more information then. I don't want you to ignore the power in the everyday. It doesn't mean your ancestor has to be in the newspaper because they were or they were receiving accolades. They could have just been mentioned in an advertisement or a local news story about something maybe small, but it was a big deal that day in the town. So just as an example here, I have the Shields Daily News. We have 3 pages. In the first page, there's mentions of marriages and deaths, and Miss Wilson is advertising her education services. On page 2, we have diaries of local events in 1871. So the newspaper's from 1920, but they've done a bit of a look back. I don't know why they've decided 49 years earlier. It's strange, but that's what they picked that day. And they actually listed life events, people that died and marriages that happened 49 years earlier in the town. There's some local news stories. Poor Elizabeth had been murdered by her housekeeper. There was a lovely fictional story written by Emma Mortimer, gives her full name next to the story. By page 3, there's a trial about bigamy. It names everybody involved. A report of neglected children. You also had a notice that Miss Isabella gained her graduate degree. And there's a celebration of a 40th wedding anniversary. So you never know how a could pop up in these newspapers. Women also appear in newspaper sport. The first women's cricket, the first report of a women's cricket match was in 1745 in Surrey. The image from 1888, the newspaper The Graphic, and the description of the match that day was that a lady cricketer is in no way ungraceful. So, good to know. It did comment on the athleticism of the women and did say that it was a pretty good match on that day. The newspaper article does include some of the names of the players, not all of them, but a few of them. There's also suffragette titles. Maybe you didn't know that, maybe your ancestor was involved in the movement. She may not have been arrested or been one of the most notorious or famous ones, but she could have been involved in a local association. Throughout the country, there were small associations constantly raising money for the suffrage movement. And within these newspapers, you also have reports of these local associations. So the reports would detail the names of on the board of the association, such as like the secretary and the treasurer, and when elections happen within the association, and then maybe special mentions for some donations as well. Marriages and divorces is another thing, of course, you're going to find in the newspaper. On the left-hand side, we can see some marriage announcements from 1986. And then we have another marriage announcement from 1940 with lovely images and photographs alongside them. You'll also find some reports of divorces. In 1857, the Parliament passed the Matrimonial Causes Act, and that's when the divorce cases moved from the church courts or the ecclesiastical courts over to the civil courts. And at that time, it was quite expensive to have a divorce. So it would have been wealthy people, your aristocracy, your politicians, actors or actresses that would have been involved in the divorce proceedings. And people read this like they read today. They wanted to know all the juicy details. People went to the court and applauded when verdicts came out. In this example here, the damages was quite notorious, or a famous case, because it was one of the biggest awards. It was £5,000 awarded to the injured husband. His wife or ex-wife at that time then was an actress and had adultery. The court case actually came from the 14th of February. It happened on Valentine's Day as well, but it also reports that there was applause by the audience in the gallery when the verdict was read. We have a question here from Ricky, who asks whether it was common for women to lie about their age if their husband was young, because within the census. Now, I will say, just in general, it does happen in records that people lie about their age. Military service people lie about their age. In a census record, they might lie about their age because maybe or on a marriage record, maybe lie about their age and just fudge it by a year or so. That does happen. And again, always remember, like I said before, sometimes they didn't really know their age or keep count of it. It's remarkable when you look through the census records how a single person's age could completely fluctuate. It's supposed to be every 10 years, but somehow they're only 8 years difference, and then they're 12 years difference. It's really interesting with the ages, how much that can change, and that you need to, again, kind of keep an eye on that and make sure you're searching for kind of birth years around. Just starting to wrap up here. So another piece of the newspapers that I wanted to mention was associations and charities. Like I kind of mentioned with the suffragette newspapers, women often joined associations, local associations, and they would fundraise and be on committees as well. So on the left-hand side, you have the Infirmary Ladies Association. You can see details of their annual meeting, the names of their vice president, of the secretary. On the right-hand side is the Colchester Imbecile Asylum, the Ladies Association meeting. And this article actually detailed the names of all of the members of the association and how much they were able to donate or raise at that time. It definitely put a lot of pressure on you to make sure that you raised enough and that you didn't look too cheap in these newspaper articles. One last note I want to mention about the newspapers, and you can see where I've circled there. It says like Wilkin or Miss Willis, luckily Miss M. Willis, but example is Miss Alexander as well. It's not very often in early newspapers that you'll find a woman's full name. You won't often find her first name. And it happens with the men as well, just Mr. Smith or Mr. Jones. So it's a little bit more difficult. So the best way to find it is try and keep narrowing down to like the location and have an idea of where your ancestor lived. And my final slide now, just wrapping up, one of the great things I love about newspapers is it just really adds a social context to your family tree. Maybe you haven't found your ancestor in the newspaper, but you do know that she was a nurse in 1893. You don't have a photograph of her, but if you look through the newspapers, you might find photographs of other nurses. So you might get an idea about when, what she could have looked, what her uniform could have looked like. So here we have 3 images of nurses from 1893, 1903, and then later from the beginning, or from the Second World War, 1939. And you can see what the women looked like, how they dressed, how they did their hair and things like that. So I think it's a really great idea to search about details about your ancestors' life. Search the town that they lived in, understand a bit more about what it was like for them to grow up, to kind of create that overall narrative about your ancestor. So that brings me to the end of our presentation. We've run a little bit over, but I'll be about for another 10 minutes to answer some questions online. I do want to say thank you to everyone for joining. Thank you to everyone that has been participating in all the Findmypast videos and adding comments and questions. I hope to be able to answer these. I don't know if we'll be able to get to all of your questions, but we are doing regular presentations, regular question and answer sessions. So just keep an eye on the Facebook. The experts in our team are just going to keep coming back. So again, thank you very much. Thanks for joining today, and I hope you all stay safe and healthy.